Hey, I'm really glad you're here. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
My father didn't ease into it. He slammed a thick stack of papers onto the living room table like he was presenting evidence in court, not talking to his own daughter. "Sit down, Evelyn." I was already standing still holding my car keys. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were never casual, but tonight felt different the second I walked in. Too quiet, too staged. My mother Margaret sat upright on the couch, hands folded like she was about to attend church. My sister Chloe sat beside her shoulders, shaking, dressed in full uniform, like she had just stepped out of a recruitment poster. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect victim. I didn't sit. "What is this?" I asked. Arthur, retired General Arthur Hayes, in case anyone forgot, pushed the papers closer to me with 2 fingers. Read. I glanced down. Statements, loan documents, credit lines, numbers that didn't belong in a normal conversation. Then I saw it. $240,000. I let out a short breath. "That's not real." "It is very real," my mother said quickly, her voice tight. "And it needs to be handled immediately." Chloe let out a shaky sob on cue, pressing a tissue to her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad." I looked at her, really looked this time. Not the uniform, not the tears, the timing. "You want me to believe this just happened?" Arthur's jaw tightened. "This is not the time for your attitude." "No," I said calmly. "This is exactly the time." I picked up one of the documents and flipped through it. Multiple accounts, multiple lenders, not one bad decision, a pattern. "You've been digging this hole for a while," I said, glancing at Chloe. She looked down, crying harder. My mother leaned forward. "Evelyn, listen to me. Your sister made mistakes. But this is fixable." I dropped the papers back on the table. "Fixable?" How Arthur answered like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You're going to withdraw your TSP." I blinked once. "My retirement fund?" "Yes," he said. "And if that's not enough, you'll take out a loan to cover the rest." For a second, I thought I misheard him. "You want me," I said slowly, "to drain my military retirement and go into debt. To pay for her mistakes." "It's not about mistakes," my mother cut in quickly. "It's about protecting the family." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "No, it's about protecting her." Chloe let out another sob, louder this time. "I could lose everything, Evelyn. My clearance, my career." Arthur leaned forward, his voice dropping into that tone he used when he expected obedience. "If this gets flagged, she loses her security clearance. You understand what that means?" I did. No clearance, no career. No career, no future in the military. Everything Chloe had built, everything my parents bragged about at every dinner, every holiday, gone. "That's not my fault," I said. My mother's expression hardened. "She's your sister, and I'm your daughter," I replied. "Or does that only matter when I'm useful?" Arthur's hand hit the table, hard. "Watch your tone." I didn't flinch. "No," I said. "You watch yours." The room went still. That was the moment everything shifted. Not the money, not the papers. That. Chloe's crying softened into quiet sniffles. She knew what was coming next. She'd seen this play out before. Arthur stood up slowly, like he was giving me one last chance to fall in line. "You will fix this," he said. No, it came out clean. No hesitation, no anger, just a fact. My mother's face went pale. "Evelyn, I'm not touching my TSP," I said. "I'm not taking out a loan, and I'm definitely not covering for something I had nothing to do with." Chloe looked up at me, eyes red, voice trembling. "You'd really let me lose everything?" I met her gaze. "You already made that decision." Arthur lost it. "You are unbelievable," he snapped. "Selfish, disrespectful, after everything this family has done for you." I crossed my arms. "Everything you've done for me? You mean constantly reminding me I'm not her?" "That's not what this is about," my mother said, but she didn't sound convinced. Arthur stepped closer, his voice rising. "Your sister is an officer. She has a future. She represents this family. And what do I represent?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I nodded once. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Silence filled the room again, heavier this time. Then Arthur pointed toward the door. "If you walk out of this house without fixing this," he said, each word sharp and deliberate, "don't ever call yourself a Hayes again." My mother inhaled sharply. "Arthur?" He cut her off. "She needs to understand what this means." I looked at him, really looked at him, not my father, not a general, just a man who had already decided which daughter mattered more. Got it, I said. Chloe started crying again, louder now. Please don't do this. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, slipped it on, and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. Not my mother, not my sister, not even my father. My hand rested on the doorknob for a second, just long enough to make sure I felt nothing. Then I stepped outside. The night air was colder than I expected. Quiet, normal, like nothing inside that house had just happened. I walked to my car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. For a moment I just sat there, hands on the wheel. No tears, no anger, just clarity. I started the engine, and then my phone buzzed. I glanced down, a notification. Not a text, not a call, a security alert. From a military server. I frowned and picked up my phone. Unusual activity detected. My grip tightened slightly. That wasn't normal, not for my account. Not for anything tied to me. I opened the alert, my mind already shifting gears. Whatever this was, it wasn't random, and somehow I had a feeling it was about to make tonight a lot bigger than $240,000. Have you ever been asked to sacrifice your entire future to protect someone who wouldn't do the same for you, and realized in that exact moment that walking away might cost you everything, but staying would cost you even more? I didn't go home. By the time I pulled out of my parents' driveway, my phone was still in my hand, the security alert glowing on the screen like it was waiting for me to catch up. I drove straight to base. No music, no calls, just the quiet hum of the engine, and the kind of focus that only shows up when something doesn't make sense. Because that alert didn't belong in my life. And neither did a $240,000 debt. The gate guard recognized me and waved me through without a word. It was late, but not unusual for someone in logistics to be on base after hours. Supply chains don't care what time it is. I parked near my building, grabbed my badge, and headed inside. The hallway lights were dimmed. A couple of offices still had lights on, but mine was empty. Good, I didn't need questions. I sat down, logged in, and pulled up the alert. Unusual activity detected on associated financial authorization channels. That was a very polite way of saying something was wrong. I started with the obvious. I cross-checked my credentials. No unauthorized logins. No foreign IP addresses tied directly to my account. Clean. Which made it worse, because if it wasn't coming through me, then it was coming through something tied to me. I leaned back slightly, thinking. Then I opened the internal procurement system. If Chloe's debt was really just credit cards and bad decisions, it wouldn't show up here. But something about the number didn't sit right. $240,000 isn't a shopping spree. That's a pattern. I pulled up recent vendor activity tied to Chloe's unit. At first, everything looked normal. Standard supply requests, routine approvals. Then I filtered by vendor name. And that's when I saw it. A company I didn't recognize. Small, recently registered. Barely any history. But it kept showing up, again and again. Low-dollar contracts. Just under the threshold that triggers automatic review. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, 12,000. Individually, nothing suspicious. Together, a steady stream. I clicked into the vendor profile. Registered address, generic office space. No real footprint. No established contract history outside the space. I felt my jaw tighten slightly. Okay, what are you doing, Chloe? I pulled transaction history, added everything up. The numbers climbed fast. 50,000, 80, 120. I kept going. 240,000. There it was, not credit cards, not random debt. This was controlled. Intentional. I sat there for a second, staring at the screen. My sister hadn't just made mistakes. She built something, a shell company. And she'd been feeding it contracts from inside the system, quietly, carefully, just enough to avoid attention. Until she got greedy. I let out a slow breath. Unbelievable. My phone buzzed again. I glanced down. A notification from Instagram. Chloe had posted. Of course she had. I opened it. There she was, full uniform, perfect lighting, caption about honor, discipline, and service. I almost laughed. She'd been stealing from the same system she was posing in front of. I locked my phone and set it aside. This wasn't about embarrassment. This was federal. I turned back to the screen and dug deeper. Ownership records. Corporate filings. That's when things got more interesting. The company wasn't directly in her name. Smart. It was registered under a third party, but the digital trail wasn't clean. Email contact, metadata, submission timestamps. Everything pointed back to a terminal on base. Specifically, public affairs, Chloe's office. I sat up a little straighter. Wow. She didn't even leave the building. I pulled the login records tied to the submissions. Same workstation, same time blocks that matched her schedule. She wasn't hiding. She just assumed no one would look. And for a while, no one did. Until tonight, I kept going. Because at this point, stopping would have been stupid. If she built the company to pull money out, then she needed capital to start it. No business runs on nothing. I searched for linked financial instruments, loans, credit lines, anything tied to the company's formation. And then I found it. A VA-backed loan. My eyes narrowed. That's not right. I opened the file. Borrower information, my name. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I didn't move right away. I just stared at it. Then I opened the document. Signature section. There it was, my name, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. Not really, it was close. Close enough to pass at a glance. Close enough to get approved. But I knew my own handwriting. And this wasn't it. I clicked into the authorization logs. Submission source, same base, same network, same pattern, Chloe. She didn't just take money, she used me to do it. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Okay, now it made sense. All of it. The urgency, the pressure, the guilt trip at dinner. They weren't trying to protect her career. They were trying to bury evidence. Because if I paid that debt, if I transferred money, covered those accounts, closed those loans, I wouldn't just be helping her. I'd be confirming the transactions, accepting responsibility, becoming part of it. Federal fraud doesn't care about family loyalty. It cares about signatures. And mine was already on the paperwork, just not by my hand. I looked back at the screen, every piece lining up. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't desperation. This was calculated. And my parents knew enough to panic. Which meant one thing. They didn't tell me everything at that table, not even close. I picked up my phone again, staring at Chloe's smiling face on the screen. Perfect officer, perfect daughter, perfect lie. Then I set it down and turned back to my system. Because at this point there was only one question left. Not whether I was going to help her, but how far this actually went. And who else thought I'd be stupid enough to clean it up for them? I didn't call anyone. Not my parents, not Chloe, not even to ask the obvious question why. Because I already knew the answer. They thought I'd fix it. They thought I'd panic, drain my retirement sign, whatever they put in front of me, and make it disappear before anyone important noticed. They were wrong. I closed the loan file and opened a fresh report window instead. If Chloe wanted to play this like it was just family drama, she picked the wrong sister. I didn't raise my voice. I documented everything. The first thing I needed wasn't a confrontation, it was confirmation. I pulled up internal access logs again and flagged every submission tied to that shell company, every contract, every timestamp, every login session. Then I picked up my phone and sent a short message. You on base need your help, quiet. Marcus replied in under a minute. Give me 10. Sergeant Major Marcus Hale wasn't someone you called unless you were serious. He didn't do gossip, he didn't do favors, he did facts. 10 minutes later, he walked into my office, took one look at my screen, and shut the door behind him. You look like you didn't sleep, he said. I didn't. He pulled up a chair without asking. What are we looking at? I turned the monitor slightly so he could see everything. Procurement fraud, I said. Internal. Small contracts routed through a shell company, all tied back to one workstation. He scanned the data quickly, his expression tightening just enough to tell me he understood the weight of it. Whose workstation? I didn't hesitate. Public affairs. He exhaled once. That narrows it down. It's Chloe, I said. He didn't react the way most people would. No shock, no questions about family, just a nod. All right, he said. What do you need, metadata? I replied. Full IP trace on every submission tied to that vendor. I want timestamps, device, IDs, everything. He leaned back slightly, studying me. You reporting this? Not yet. That got his attention. Then you're walking a line, he said. I know. He held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded again. All right, I'll pull what I can. No lecture, no hesitation. That's why I called him. He got to work immediately, plugging into the system with the kind of efficiency that only comes from doing this for years. While he worked, my phone buzzed again. I didn't need to check to know who it was. Still, I glanced down. My mother, you need to stop being stubborn. This has to be handled before Friday. Another message came in right after. My father. This is your responsibility now. Don't make this worse than it already is. I didn't respond. I set the phone face down and focused on the screen. Marcus spoke without looking up. They pushing you non-stop. Figures. He clicked through another set of logs, then paused. Got something. I leaned forward slightly. Show me. He pulled up a detailed trace. IP addresses, device fingerprints, login sessions. Every submission tied to that shell company was coming from the same internal network. Same building, same office cluster, public affairs. He drilled down further. Specific terminal, specific user session. Chloe's workstation. No guesswork, no assumptions, just data. Marcus sat back folding his arms. That's clean, he said. No spoofing, no external routing. She didn't even try to mask it. I nodded once. She didn't think anyone would look. He glanced at me. You sure you want to keep this internal? For now, I said. He studied me again, this time longer. You're not protecting her, he said. No, good, because that's what this looked like from the outside. A sister quietly digging into something that could ruin her family. But that wasn't what I was doing. I was making sure. When this hit, it didn't miss. Marcus saved the files, then transferred a copy to my secured drive. You've got everything you need, he said. Metadata access logs, submission trails. It all lines up. Thank you. He stood up, adjusting his uniform. If you're going to move on this, he added, don't wait too long. Stuff like this has a way of spreading, I know. He paused at the door. And Evelyn, I looked up. This isn't small, he said. You don't get halfway involved in something like this. I'm not planning to. He nodded once and left. The room felt quieter after that. Not calm, just focused. I turned back to my screen and started organizing everything. Contracts, loan documents, metadata, authorization logs. Piece by piece, it came together into something that didn't look like a mistake anymore. It looked like a case. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Chloe. I stared at her name for a second before opening the message. Why are you doing this? I didn't reply. Another message came through. We're family. You don't need to dig into everything. Just help me fix it. I let out a short breath. There it was, not denial, not even a real apology, just expectation, like I was still part of the plan. I locked my phone again and went back to work. Because at this point, the decision wasn't emotional anymore. It was procedural. 3 days. That's how long they gave me. 3 days to drain my future and clean up her mess. 3 days to become legally responsible for something I didn't do. So I used those 3 days differently. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I built the file. By the end of the 3rd day, everything was ready. Clean, organized, traceable, no gaps, no assumptions, just facts. I opened the reporting system and paused for a second, my hand hovering over the keyboard. Once this went through, there was no pulling it back. No family meeting to fix it. No quiet solution. This would go where it needed to go, and it wouldn't stop. My phone buzzed one last time. My father again. This is your last chance. Transfer the money tonight. I stared at the message for a second. Then I set the phone down and made my decision. I entered my credentials, attached every file, flagged every account connected to the transactions. Then I submitted a formal report requesting an immediate freeze on all related financial activity. Not a warning, not a note, a full escalation, destination Pentagon oversight system, automated review, federal level, no shortcuts, no favors. I hit send. The system processed for a few seconds, then confirmed submission. Just like that, it was done. No yelling, no confrontation, no dramatic moment, just a quiet click. And the first move had already been made. They gave me 3 days to fix their problem. I used 3 days to make sure it couldn't be hidden anymore. The fallout didn't take days. It took hours. By the next morning, the system had already done what it was designed to do, quietly, efficiently, and without asking for permission. Accounts flagged, transactions frozen, notifications sent to the right desks. I was halfway through reviewing inventory reports when my phone started buzzing nonstop. I didn't even have to check. I already knew. Still, I picked it up, Missed calls, my mother, my father, Chloe, again and again. I set the phone back down and kept working. If they were calling this much, it meant one thing. It hit. Hard. About 20 minutes later, Marcus walked past my office, slowed down just enough to glance in, then stepped inside without knocking. "You see it yet?" he asked. "I'm guessing I don't need to check." He shook his head slightly, almost impressed. "Credit accounts frozen, vendor payments locked, flags all over the system." I nodded once. "Good." He leaned against the desk. "Your sister just got her world paused." "Temporarily," I said. "For now. That's how this worked. Freeze first, investigate second. Consequences came later, and there were always consequences." My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. A message from my mother. "What did you do?" No greeting, no context. Just panic. I didn't respond. Marcus watched me for a second. "They don't know it was you. They know enough." He nodded slowly. "Well, they're about to know the rest." I didn't ask what he meant. I found out about 10 minutes later, not from a call, from a post. Someone had tagged Chloe. I opened it. Photos from a private lunch event at the officers' club. White tablecloths, perfect uniforms, wives of senior officers smiling like everything in the world made sense. Chloe stood in the middle of it, polished as always, until the second photo. Her expression changed. Subtle but there, confusion, then tension, then something closer to panic. The caption from whoever posted it said everything. "When your card gets declined mid-toast." I stared at the screen for a second. Of course it happened in public. It always does. That's how these things go. You build an image. Then the system tears it down in front of an audience. I locked my phone and went back to work. Because embarrassment wasn't the real problem. Investigation was. An investigation doesn't care how good your uniform looks. About an hour later, my office phone rang. Not my cell. The actual line. I picked it up. "This is Evelyn." The voice on the other end was tight. "Lieutenant Hayes, this is Colonel Whitaker." I straightened slightly. "Sir, you have a situation developing outside." I already knew what that meant. "Yes, sir. Your father is here." Of course he was. And he's not being subtle about it. I stood up, already reaching for my jacket. "Understood, Lieutenant," he added, his tone shifting slightly. "Handle this professionally." "I will, sir." I hung up and stepped out into the hallway. Marcus was already there. "Let me guess," he said. "My father." He nodded. He came in hot. That didn't surprise me. Arthur Hayes didn't do quiet. He did control, and when he lost it, he got louder. We walked toward the front of the building together, the tension building with every step. By the time we got there, I could hear him. Raised voice, sharp tone, the kind of authority that expected people to fall in line just from hearing it. "I don't care what your protocol is," he was saying. "Get your commanding officer down here now." A couple of soldiers stood nearby, trying to stay neutral, while clearly wishing they were somewhere else. Colonel Whitaker stood across from him, calm but firm. "I've already told you, sir, this is not how this works." Arthur turned, slightly frustration written all over his face. "That's exactly how it works," he snapped. "You're going to—" He stopped when he saw me. For a second, the entire space went quiet. Not because the situation changed, because the focus did. I stepped forward, stopping a few feet away from him. "Sir, I didn't call him Dad. Not here, not now." His expression hardened immediately. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice low but loaded. "What did you do?" Straight to it. No pretending, no confusion. I met his gaze evenly. I followed procedure. "That's not what I asked," he snapped. "It's the answer you're getting." His jaw tightened. "You think this is a game," he said. "Do you have any idea what you've started?" "Yes," I said calmly. "An investigation." He took a step closer, lowering his voice like that made it more controlled. "You're going to fix this. Right now." No, that word again. Same tone, same certainty, different battlefield. His eyes narrowed. "You don't get to say no to me." I held his gaze. I just did. That hit harder than anything else. Not the refusal, the lack of hesitation. Arthur wasn't used to that. Not from me, not from anyone. "You're out of line," he said louder now. "This affects your sister's career, your family's name. This affects a federal fraud case," I cut in. The words landed clean, precise, intentional. He froze for half a second. Then his voice dropped again, sharper this time. "Withdraw the report." There it was, the real demand. Not help, not understanding, control. I shook my head slightly. I can't. His expression darkened. You can, he said, and you will. I didn't raise my voice, didn't step back, didn't soften anything. The report is no longer at the base level, I said. He paused, just enough to know something shifted. It's been escalated, I continued. To CID, that landed. You could see it. Not confusion, recognition, because he knew exactly what that meant. Military Criminal Investigation Division. Not internal, not quiet, not fixable with a phone call, even for him, even with your rank. I added my tone steady. You can't interfere in a federal financial fraud investigation. The silence that followed was different. He didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't correct me. He just stood there. For the first time since I walked in, he didn't have control of the situation, and he knew it. Around us, the soldiers stayed perfectly still, pretending not to listen while hearing every word. Colonel Whitaker didn't move either. No one stepped in. No one needed to. Because the conversation was already over. Arthur looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as the daughter who didn't measure up, not as the backup plan, but as someone he couldn't command. You've made a mistake, he said, finally, his voice quieter now. I shook my head once. No, I said, you did. He held my gaze for another second, then turned and walked out. No final threat, no dramatic exit, just silence. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Then I turned back toward my office. Because this wasn't the end of anything. It was just the part where they realized they weren't in control anymore. I knew they wouldn't stop. People like my parents don't lose control quietly. They switch tactics, and when pressure doesn't work, they go after credibility. The first sign wasn't loud. It was subtle. A pause in conversation when I walked into the room. A glance that lasted a second too long. Someone asking if I was doing okay in a tone that didn't match the question. At first I ignored it. People talk, especially on base. Information moves fast and it rarely stays accurate. But this wasn't random. It was coordinated. I felt it by the second day. I walked into the operations room and 2 officers stopped talking mid-sentence. One of them gave me a tight smile, the kind people use when they don't know what to say, but feel like they should say something anyway. You good, you? Hayes, he asked. Always, I said. He nodded, but his eyes didn't match it. That was new. I sat down, logged in, and kept working, because the fastest way to confirm a rumor is to react to it. And I wasn't going to give them that. About an hour later, Marcus stepped into my office again. He didn't sit this time. They're talking, he said. I figured. He crossed his arms. Not just talking, it's specific. I looked up. How specific? He hesitated for half a second. PTSD, he said. Unstable, emotional. Claims you're under pressure and making irrational decisions. I leaned back slightly, processing that. Creative. That's one word for it. I let out a short breath. So now I'm the problem. Marcus gave me a look. They're framing it like concern, he said. Like people are worried about you. Of course they were. That's how it works. You don't attack directly. You repackage it. Concern sounds better than accusation. I'm guessing Chloe started it, I said. Her name's coming up, he replied. A lot. I nodded once. She always did, like an audience. Marcus didn't smile. You want me to shut it down? No. He raised an eyebrow. You sure? Yeah, I said. Let them talk, because shutting it down would only make it louder. Rumors feed on resistance. What they don't like is silence. Marcus studied me for a second, then nodded. All right, he turned to leave, then paused. There's more. I looked at him. There's always more. Jag reached out, he said. They want to see you. That got my attention. For what? Anonymous complaint, he said. Mental fitness review. I didn't react right away. I just stared at him. Then I nodded slowly. Of course. Because rumors are one thing, official complaints are another, and this was escalation when I asked. This afternoon, I checked the time. 3 hours, plenty. Thanks, I said. He gave me a short nod and left. I sat there for a moment, staring at my screen without really seeing it. They didn't just want me to back off. They wanted to discredit me, make anything I reported look unreliable, make me look unstable. Because if I looked unstable, then maybe everything I found could be questioned. It was a good strategy, just not a good one against me. I spent the next couple of hours doing exactly what I always did. Work, clean, precise. documented. No mistakes, no hesitation. By the time I walked into the JAG office, I wasn't angry. I was ready. The officer waiting for me was Captain Reynolds, mid-30s, professional, neutral expression. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." I sat. He opened a file. "I'll be direct," he said. "We received an anonymous complaint regarding your mental fitness. I assumed as much." His eyes flicked up briefly, then back to the file. "The complaint alleges signs of emotional instability possible. PTSD-related symptoms, and impaired judgment under stress." I nodded slightly. "Anything else?" He flipped a page. "Claims that you may be acting out of personal resentment toward a family member and using your position to cause harm." There it was, neatly packaged. I almost respected the structure. "Do you believe that?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. "That's not my role," he said. "My role is to assess whether the complaint has merit." "Fair enough." He studied me for a moment. "You seem calm." "I am. That's not always the case in situations like this. I'm not most people." That earned the smallest reaction from him. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. "Do you have anything you'd like to say regarding these claims?" he asked. I leaned forward slightly. "Yes." He waited. "They're not true. Simple, direct, no performance." He nodded once. "I'll need to document your response," he said. "Go ahead." He wrote something down, then looked back up. "Lieutenant," he said, "off the record for a moment." I didn't respond. "I've seen complaints like this before," he continued. "They don't usually come out of nowhere." "No," I said. "They don't." He watched me carefully. "You're involved in something right now," he said. "Something bigger than this complaint." That wasn't a question. "No comment," I replied. That was enough. He closed the file. "We'll complete the review," he said. "But based on what I'm seeing, there's nothing here that suggests you're unfit for duty." I didn't think there would be. He gave a small nod. "You're free to go." I stood up. "Thank you, sir." As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Lieutenant," I looked back. "Be careful," he said. "People don't file complaints like this unless they're trying to protect something." I know. And I did better than he realized. I walked out of the office, the hallway feeling quieter than usual, not tense, clear, because now I knew exactly how far they were willing to go. Not just pressure, not just guilt. They were willing to destroy my career to save hers. I pulled out my phone as I walked, scrolled through my messages, and found it, the one from my mother, sent the night before. I opened it again, reading it slower this time. "You're not thinking clearly. You've always struggled under pressure. This isn't you. You need to stop before you ruin everything." I compared it to the complaint in my head. Same language, same phrasing, same angle. They didn't even bother changing it. I stopped walking, stared at the screen for a second, then locked my phone. That was it. Whatever room there was for compromise, it was gone. They didn't want resolution. They wanted control. And if they couldn't get it, they were willing to take everything else down with it, including me. I let out a slow breath and kept walking, because now the situation was simple. This wasn't family anymore. It was strategy. And I was done holding back. I didn't respond right away. Not to my mother. Not to Chloe. Not even to the silence that followed the JAG meeting. I let it sit. Because pressure works both ways. They thought they were closing in. I needed them to believe that. That night, I finally picked up my phone and opened my mother's last message. I read it again. Same tone, same control, same assumption that I would eventually fold. Then I typed back, "I can't keep doing this. I'm exhausted. Let's fix it." I stared at the message for a second. Then I hit send. It didn't take long. 3 dots. Immediate. "Finally, I knew you'd come to your senses." Of course she did. Another message followed right after. "We'll set up a meeting tomorrow. Your father will handle everything. Not we. Not let's talk. Handle everything." I almost smiled. Within an hour, I had a time and location. Family attorney's office. Of course. Neutral ground. Controlled environment. Paperwork ready. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted a signature. The next day, I walked in 5 minutes early. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Small smile, polite, no idea what kind of conversation was about to happen behind those doors. I sat down, hands folded, calm. No rush, no nerves, just patience. The door opened exactly on time. Evelyn. Arthur stood there, already inside the office like he owned the place. I stood up and walked in. My mother sat to the side, composed but watching me closely. Chloe sat across the table, posture perfect again, like the last few days hadn't happened. No tears this time. Interesting. The attorney sat at the head of the table, a stack of documents neatly arranged in front of him. "Thank you for coming," he said. Professional and neutral. I nodded once and took my seat. Arthur didn't waste time. "I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable," he said. I didn't respond. He slid a document across the table toward me. "This resolves everything." I looked down. Clean, structured, legal language, transfer of financial responsibility, the $240,000 debt. Reassigned. To me, just like that. I flipped a page. There it was, the explanation, accounting discrepancy. I almost laughed. "That's creative," I said. Arthur didn't react. "It's sufficient," he said. "This document makes it clear the debt originated from internal mismanagement on your end." "My end," I repeated. "Yes." I looked up at him. "And that clears Chloe." "It protects the family," my mother said quickly. Of course it did. Always the same phrase. I leaned back slightly, scanning the rest of the document. Loan reassignment, liability acceptance, waiver of dispute. They didn't just want me to pay. They wanted me to own it, legally, completely. If I signed this, everything I found, everything I reported, would collapse under it. Because I'd be admitting it was mine. Smart move. I had to give them that. "You've already spoken to a lender," Arthur continued. "We can consolidate the remaining balance once this is signed." "Efficient," I said. "We don't have time for delays," he replied. No, they didn't. That was the whole point. Pressure, speed, control. I let my fingers rest lightly on the edge of the paper. Chloe finally spoke. "Evelyn," she said, her voice softer now. "This doesn't have to get worse. We can fix this and move on." I looked at her. No tears, no panic, just expectation, like this was already done. Like I was just catching up to a decision they made without me. "You really believe that?" I said. She held my gaze. "Yes." I nodded slowly. That was the most honest thing she'd said all week. I reached for the pen. My mother visibly relaxed. Arthur leaned back slightly. Chloe's shoulders dropped just enough to show relief. There it was, the moment they'd been waiting for. I picked up the pen and positioned it over the signature line. Then I stopped. Not dramatically, just paused. Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. "What's the issue?" I looked at the paper again, then back at him. "No issue," I said. "Just one condition." His expression shifted. "What condition?" I leaned back slightly, pen still in my hand. "I'll sign it," I said. My mother exhaled softly. Arthur didn't. "What do you want?" he asked. I looked at Chloe, then back at him. "I want to sign it at Chloe's promotion ceremony this weekend." That caught them off guard. "Why?" my mother asked. I shrugged slightly. "Because I want this to be clean," I said. "Public, final." Arthur studied me carefully. "This isn't a public matter," he said. "It will be if anything comes up later," I replied. "This way it's clear, no confusion, no questions." I let that sit for a second, then added just enough to push it where I wanted. "And I want a family photo." Chloe blinked. "What, a full one?" I said. "All of us, at the ceremony, after I sign." My mother's expression softened immediately. "That's actually a good idea," she said. Of course it was. It sounded like closure, unity, everything they'd been trying to force. Arthur was quieter, thinking, calculating. "What's the real reason?" he asked. I met his gaze evenly. "That is the reason." He held my eyes for a second longer. Looking for something, hesitation, emotion, doubt. He didn't find it, because I didn't give him anything. Finally, he nodded once. "Fine." My mother smiled, relieved. Chloe let out a breath, tension leaving her shoulders completely this time. "Thank you," she said. I nodded slightly. "You're welcome." The attorney cleared his throat. "I'll prepare the final version for signing at the event," he said. Arthur nodded. "Make sure it's ready." I set the pen down on the table. No signature, not yet. But they didn't care, because in their minds, they'd already won. I stood up. "We're done here?" I asked. Arthur nodded. "Yes." I turned and walked toward the door. No rush, no hesitation, just control. As I stepped out of the office, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it right away. I already knew what it would be. Confirmation, movement, everything lining up exactly where it needed to be. Behind me inside that room, my family believed they had pulled me back into place, back into the role they needed, the one who fixes things, the one who sacrifices, the one who signs. I walked out into the sunlight and finally pulled out my phone. A notification. System update. CID case status active. I looked at it for a second, then locked my phone and kept walking, because the difference between what they thought was happening and what was actually happening was about to become very public. I walked into the officers' club like I belonged there. Because I did, the place was already full. Dress uniforms, polished shoes, controlled smiles. The kind of room where everything looks perfect as long as no one asks the wrong questions. Chloe stood near the front, surrounded by people who mattered. Command staff, senior officers, families who knew exactly how to show up when it counted. She looked exactly how she wanted to be seen. Sharp uniform, medals aligned, hair flawless, the golden daughter. I paused for a second, just long enough to take it in. Then I kept walking. No one stopped me. A few people nodded as I passed. Some recognized me, some didn't. Either way, it didn't matter, because tonight wasn't about being recognized. It was about being precise. Arthur stood near the podium, already in position, calm, confident, back in his element. Control looked good on him. My mother sat at one of the front tables, smiling politely at whoever was speaking to her, like nothing had ever been wrong. They were ready. They thought this was the final step. Closure. I found a seat off to the side and sat down, placing the folder on my lap. Thick, organized, final, not the document they expected. The ceremony started right on time. An officer stepped up, gave the usual opening remarks. Service, commitment, leadership, all the words people like Chloe use when they want to sound like they earned everything. I listened without really hearing it. Because I wasn't here for speeches, I was here for timing. Chloe was called forward. Applause filled the room. She stepped up with that same confident posture, like the last week hadn't even happened. Like nothing could touch her. Arthur followed, standing beside her as they prepared for the formal promotion. He took the microphone. Of course he did. Today he began, his voice steady and practiced. We recognize not just achievement, but character. I almost smiled. Here it comes. Chloe Hayes represents the very best of what this uniform stands for, he continued. Discipline, integrity, honor. There it was, integrity. I glanced around the room. People were listening, nodding, believing, because why wouldn't they? This is what they were shown. This is what they were told. Arthur went on, building it up like he always did. Not just praising her, but framing her as something bigger. A reflection of the family, of the name, of everything they stood for. Everything he said is built on truth and accountability. That almost made me laugh. Almost. Applause started again as he stepped back. The formal promotion proceeded. Insignia adjusted. Hands shaken, photos taken. Chloe smiled through all of it. Perfect. Untouchable. Until it was time. Arthur stepped forward again. Before we conclude, he said we have one final family matter to resolve. There it was, the setup. He glanced toward me, Evelyn. Every head in the room turned. I stood up, picked up the folder, and walked forward. No rush, no hesitation, just steady steps across a room full of people who had no idea what was about to happen. Chloe looked at me smiling, relieved, expecting, like this was the part where everything went back to normal. I stopped in front of her, close enough to see the confidence in her eyes. You ready? She asked quietly. I held her gaze. Yeah. She nodded slightly, then glanced at the folder. Let's finish this. Arthur stood just behind her, watching me closely, measuring, waiting. I opened the folder, pulled out the top set of documents, thick stack, clean edges, prepared. Chloe shifted slightly, already positioning herself to take them. I didn't hand them to her. Instead, I stepped past her. The movement was small, but it changed everything. I walked straight toward the presiding officer, a 2-star general standing just off to the side of the podium. His expression shifted slightly as I approached. Sir, I said, holding out the folder, for your review. He hesitated for half a second, then took it. That was all it took. Chloe turned, confusion hitting her face for the first time. Evelyn, what are you doing? I didn't answer. The general opened the folder, flipped the first page, then the second. His expression changed fast, not dramatic, just sharp, focused. He looked up at me. Where did you get this? From the system, sir, I said. Verified. That was when the doors opened. Not loudly, not aggressively, just enough. 2 men walked in, plain clothes, badges visible. CID, the room didn't react right away. Because most people don't recognize what they're seeing until it's too late. The general closed the folder halfway and looked toward them. They walked straight up, no hesitation, no confusion. One of them spoke. Lieutenant Chloe Hayes. The room went quiet. Not slowly, instantly. Chloe didn't move. Ma'am, the agent continued, you are under investigation for financial fraud, falsification of official documents, and unauthorized diversion of military funds. You could feel it hit the room, like pressure dropping all at once. That's not, Chloe started. The agent didn't raise his voice. Ma'am, you are being placed under arrest pending formal charges. Arthur stepped forward immediately. This is a mistake, he said sharply. There's been a misunderstanding. The second agent turned to him. Sir, I suggest you step back. That was new. Arthur Hayes wasn't used to being told to step back. Not by anyone. This is my daughter's, he said. And this is a federal investigation, the agent replied. No emotion, just fact. Chloe looked at me, really looked this time, not confident, not controlled, just exposed. What did you do, she asked. I met her gaze. I didn't do this, I said. You did. The agent took her arm, not rough, just firm, procedure. The general still held the folder, flipping through it again, now fully aware of what was in his hands. IP logs, signature analysis, transaction records, everything, right there, in the middle of her promotion, in front of everyone who mattered. Chloe tried to pull back slightly. You don't understand. I understand exactly, I said. The room stayed silent. No one moved. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. The applause from earlier still echoed in the room, but now it sounded different, like it belonged to someone else. Chloe's medals caught the light as she was turned toward the exit. Still polished, still perfect, just meaningless now. Arthur didn't move, didn't speak, didn't command anything. For the first time in my life, he had no control over what happened next. The agents walked Chloe out. No scene, no shouting, just the quiet, undeniable end of something she thought would never be questioned. The doors closed behind them, and just like that, the image was gone. I stood there for a second longer, then turned and walked back toward the side of the room. No one stopped me. No one spoke to me. They just watched, because they finally saw what was real, and what was never real to begin with. I didn't stay after the ceremony. There was nothing left to watch. By the time I stepped outside, the air felt different, quieter, cleaner, not because anything had been fixed, but because the truth was finally out where no one could ignore it. The investigation moved fast after that, faster than most people expected, because once CID gets involved, it's not about opinions anymore. It's about evidence. And there was a lot of it. Chloe was formally charged within days. Fraud, forgery, misuse of military procurement systems, unauthorized financial gain tied to federal contracts. Everything I found, held, every document, every log, every trace, clean, unarguable. She didn't come back to base, didn't post again, didn't try to explain anything, because there was nothing left to explain. The court-martial process started soon after. Closed hearings, internal reviews, legal teams moving through everything she thought she had buried. The outcome wasn't a surprise. Loss of rank, dishonorable discharge, and time. Fort Leavenworth. Not a headline, not a dramatic fall, just a quiet, permanent end to everything she built her identity around. And for the first time in her life, no one could fix it for her. My parents didn't handle it well. That's a polite way of saying everything collapsed. Because the investigation didn't stop with Chloe. It followed the money. And the money led straight back to them. That family support they kept talking about, it showed up in the worst possible place. Collateral. They had signed off on financial backing for her company. Used their property to secure it. Didn't ask enough questions. Didn't want to know the answers. The house was the first thing to go. Not immediately, but fast enough. Accounts frozen, assets reviewed. Legal pressure stacking up from directions they couldn't control. The same system they thought they could outmaneuver closed in on them instead. By the time everything settled, the house was gone, sold under pressure, not by choice. Arthur Hayes, retired general, standing in a smaller place with fewer rooms and no audience. Margaret still trying to hold on to appearances that no longer existed. They didn't call me during that time, not at first. Pride doesn't disappear overnight, but desperation does something interesting. It shows up when there's nothing left to protect. It was about 3 weeks after the ceremony. I had just finished a long day and was heading out to the parking lot. Normal day, normal routine. The kind I had been building for years without anyone noticing. I unlocked my car and reached for the door. That's when I heard my name, Evelyn. I turned. They were standing a few feet away, both of them. My father looked smaller, not physically, just different, less certain. My mother's eyes were already red. They walked toward me slowly, not confidently, not like before, carefully, like they weren't sure how close they were allowed to get. "We need to talk," my mother said. I didn't move. "You're already talking." She swallowed, her voice shaky. "Please." I glanced at my father. He didn't speak right away. That alone told me everything. "What do you need?" I asked. Direct. No space for anything else. My mother stepped forward slightly. "It's Chloe," she said. "She needs legal help, a real defense. We can't afford what she needs." There it was. Not an apology, not regret. A request. My father finally spoke. "You have savings," he said. "You've always been careful, careful." That was the word they used for everything they didn't understand. "You want me to pay for her defense," I said. "Yes," my mother said quickly. "She's still your sister." I let that sit for a second. Same line, different day, different reality. "She committed federal fraud," I said. "She made mistakes," my mother insisted. I looked at her. "No," I said. "She made choices." My father stepped closer. "This doesn't have to be permanent," he said. "With the right representation, we can reduce the damage." We, still assuming I was part of it. I shook my head slightly. "You still don't get it," I said. My mother's voice broke. "We're asking for your help." And there it was, the shift, not control, not demand, asking, too late. I opened my car door, paused, then turned back toward them. "Do you know what the funniest part of all this is?" I said. They didn't answer. "I could pay that $240,000 in cash," I continued. "Right now, no loans, no stress." They both froze. Confusion, hope, all at once. My father frowned slightly. "What are you talking about?" I held his gaze. "All those nights you said I was wasting my time," I said. "Working late, not socializing, not building the right connections." My mother blinked. "You said I was hiding," I added, avoiding real responsibility. I let a small pause sit between us. I was building something. They didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't understand yet. "A logistics software system," I said. "Supply chain optimization, civilian application." My father's expression shifted. "Just slightly. A few weeks ago," I continued, "I sold it." Silence. Then, "For how much?" he asked. I didn't rush the answer. 12 million, the number just sat there, heavy, uncomfortable, real. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father didn't speak, didn't react. He just stared at me, trying to process something that didn't fit into the version of me he had already decided was true. "I could have paid her debt without even thinking about it," I said. And that part was true, completely. I stepped closer, just enough. "But here's the part you still don't understand," I said, my voice steady. "This family is not entitled to anything I've built." No anger, no raised voice, just clarity. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Evelyn," "No," I said. I didn't let her finish. "You made your choice," I continued. "At that table, when you told me to sacrifice everything for her." My father finally found his voice. "We were trying to protect the family." I nodded once. "And I protected myself." That was the difference. I stepped back, turned, got into my car. My mother moved forward slightly. "Please," she said, "don't leave it like this." I looked at her one last time. "It was already like this," I said. I closed the door, started the engine, and drove out of the parking lot without looking back. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just quiet. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anything that didn't belong to me anymore. And that felt better than any version of family they ever tried to force me into. I didn't expect the silence to be this loud. After everything ended, the investigation, the arrest, the fallout, you'd think I'd feel something bigger. Relief, victory, closure. Instead, it was quiet. No more calls, no more pressure. No more voices telling me what I should do, who I should be, what I owed. Just space. And for the first time in my life, I had to sit in it. That's the part no one talks about. Setting boundaries doesn't feel powerful in the moment. It feels empty because when you cut off what's been controlling you for years, even if it was toxic, it still leaves a gap. And you don't immediately know what to fill it with. I kept my routine, work, training, systems, structure. That part of my life didn't change, but everything around it did. No more Sunday dinners, no more forced conversations, no more trying to prove that I was enough in a room that had already decided I wasn't. And if I'm being honest, that last part hurt more than I expected. Not because I missed them, but because I finally accepted something I had been avoiding for years. I was never going to be enough for them. Not in the way I thought. Not in the way I kept trying to earn. That realization doesn't break you, it resets you. Because once you stop chasing approval that was never coming, you start asking better questions, like why you kept chasing it in the first place. For me, the answer was simple. Family, that word carries weight, especially in a culture where you're taught that family comes first, that you show up no matter what, that you sacrifice, you support, you stay, no matter what. But no one really defines what no matter what actually means. Because there's a line, and most people don't realize they've crossed it until they're already losing themselves. I crossed it a long time ago. I just didn't call it what it was. I called it loyalty. I called it responsibility. I called it doing the right thing. What it really was slow self-destruction. Because loyalty without boundaries doesn't make you a good person. It makes you an easy target. And once people learn that you'll sacrifice yourself to keep the peace, they will expect it. Every time. That's exactly what happened in my family. Chloe made the mistakes, but I was expected to fix them. Not because it was fair, because it was predictable. I was the stable one, the responsible one, the one who didn't cause problems. So when a real problem showed up, they handed it to me, like it was mine. And for a long time, I would have taken it. That's the part people don't like to admit. We act like we've always been strong, always been clear, always known our worth. That's not true. I didn't wake up one day suddenly immune to pressure. I learned, the hard way, by getting pushed far enough to realize something had to change. That dinner wasn't the beginning, it was the breaking point. Because for the first time, the cost was clear. If I said yes, I wouldn't just lose money, I'd lose my career, my integrity, my future, and I'd still be standing in the same position afterward. Still expected to give more, still not enough, so I said no. And that no cost me something. Let's not pretend it didn't. It cost me the version of family I thought I had. It cost me the illusion that things would eventually balance out. That if I just kept showing up, kept doing the right thing, they'd finally see me differently. They didn't, and they weren't going to. That's the part I want you to understand. Some people don't change when you give more, they just take more. And they call it normal. So if you're in a situation where you feel like you're always the one carrying everything, always the one fixing everything, always the one being told it's your responsibility to keep things together, you need to ask yourself one question. What is this actually costing me? Not financially, personally, emotionally, long-term. Because that cost adds up, quietly, until one day you realize you've built your entire life around other people's problems, and there's nothing left that actually belongs to you. That's where boundaries come in, not as punishment, not as revenge, as protection. And here's the part most people get wrong. You don't need a perfect explanation. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need approval. A boundary is not a negotiation, it's a decision. You decide what you will and won't carry, and then you stick to it, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable, because the moment you start explaining too much, defending too much, trying to make it make sense for people who benefit from you having no boundaries, you've already lost ground. Keep it simple. No, that's it. You don't need to add a paragraph after it. You don't need to soften it so they feel better, because the people who respect you won't need the extra explanation, and the people who don't won't accept it anyway. Another thing I learned, guilt is not a sign you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's just a sign you're doing something different, something unfamiliar, something that disrupts a pattern people relied on, and they will push back. They'll call you selfish, cold, difficult. They'll question your character, your motives, your stability. I had all of that. None of it changed the facts. So if you're waiting for the moment where setting a boundary feels easy, it won't. You just get stronger at holding it. That's the difference. Now here's what I want you to take from all of this. If you didn't create the problem, you are not responsible for solving it. That sounds obvious, but most people don't live like that. They absorb everything around them, family issues, financial mistakes, emotional chaos, and they carry it like it's part of their job. It's not. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to choose yourself. Not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that caring doesn't mean sacrificing everything you've built. I didn't lose everything when I walked away. I lost what was never really mine to begin with. Control, expectation, obligation. What I kept was everything that actually mattered. My career, my integrity, my future, and something I didn't even realize I was missing until it was gone. Peace, real peace. Not the kind that comes from keeping everyone else comfortable. The kind that comes from knowing you're no longer betraying yourself to make other people feel better. That's what boundaries give you. Not comfort, clarity, and once you have that, you don't go back. I didn't become the responsible one overnight. It happened slowly, small things at first, fixing problems no one else wanted to deal with, covering for mistakes, keeping things running when everything else felt messy. At some point that stopped being something I did and became who I was. That's how it starts. Not with one big moment, with a pattern. And once people recognize that pattern, they adjust around it. In my family, Chloe was the one who shined. I was the one who handled things. She made moves. I cleaned up after them. She took risks. I absorbed consequences. No one ever said it out loud. They didn't have to. It was understood. And the dangerous part, I agreed to it. Not directly, but through action. Every time I stepped in to fix something that wasn't mine, I reinforced the role. Every time I stayed quiet instead of pushing back, I made it easier for them to expect more. That's the part most people miss. Being used doesn't start with other people. It starts with what you tolerate. And if you're someone who's capable, reliable, and disciplined, you're more likely to fall into this trap. Because people trust you, they rely on you, and over time that reliance turns into expectation, then entitlement, then pressure, and suddenly you're not helping anymore. You're responsible for everything. That's what happened to me. I wasn't just the backup plan. I was the system. If something broke, I fixed it. If something went wrong, I handled it. And if something got out of control, they looked at me, not because I caused it, because they believed I could manage it. That belief sounds like respect. It's not. Not when it comes with no limits. Because respect includes boundaries. This didn't. This was convenience. I made their lives easier, so they kept making my life heavier. Until the weight became normal. That's how smart people get used. Not because they're weak, because they're capable. And capability attracts responsibility. But if you're not careful, it attracts the wrong kind. The kind no one else wants. The kind that doesn't belong to you. And the worst part, you don't always notice it right away. Because you're busy, focused, moving forward. You tell yourself it's temporary, that once things settle down, it'll balance out. It doesn't. It builds, quietly. Until one day you're staring at a situation like I was, being asked to sacrifice everything for something you didn't create. And somehow it feels like a reasonable request. That's when you know it's gone too far. Looking back, I can see exactly where I let it happen. Not one big mistake. A series of small ones. Saying yes when I should have paused. Stepping in when I should have stepped back. Solving problems that weren't mine. Each one felt harmless, until they stacked. That's the part I want you to pay attention to. It's not the big asks that trap you. It's the small ones. The quick favors, the just this once. The you're better at this than me. They add up, and over time they define your role. So here's the shift. If you want to stop being the person who gets used, you have to break the pattern. Not dramatically, not emotionally, strategically. The first thing, stop reacting immediately. When something goes wrong and people look at you, pause. You don't owe anyone an instant solution. That pause alone changes how people see you. Because urgency is often used to force compliance. If everything feels like an emergency, you don't have time to think. And when you don't think, you default to your role. Don't do that. Take a step back. Ask questions. What exactly is the problem? How did we get here? What's my actual involvement? You'd be surprised how often the answer is none. Second thing, separate capability from responsibility. Just because you can fix something doesn't mean you should. That's a hard one for people like me, because we're wired to solve, to improve, to optimize. But not every situation is yours to optimize. Some people need to deal with the consequences of their own decisions. That's how accountability works. And if you keep stepping in, you remove that process. You don't help them grow. You help them avoid reality. That's not support. That's enablement. Third, say it clearly, this isn't mine. No long explanation, no defensive tone, just a statement. And then hold it, because the moment you soften it, add a justification, try to make it more acceptable, you open the door again, and people will walk right through it, every time. Now let's talk about something people don't like hearing. When you stop playing your role, people will push back, hard, not because you're wrong, because you're changing the system. And systems don't like change, especially when they benefit from you. They'll question you, challenge you, guilt you. Same lines I heard, you've changed, you're being difficult. This isn't who you are. No, this is exactly who I am. I just stopped doing what was convenient for everyone else. And here's the truth. The people who only value you for what you do for them will struggle when you stop. That's not your problem, that's clarity. Because now you can see the difference between people who respect you and people who relied on you. That distinction matters more than anything. So if you're in a position where you feel like you're always the one holding everything together, take a step back. Look at the pattern, not the latest situation. The pattern. Ask yourself, if I stopped fixing things today, what would happen? Would people figure it out, or would everything fall apart? And if the answer is fall apart, then you're not helping. You're holding up something that shouldn't be standing in the first place. That's not your responsibility. It never was. The hardest part isn't saying no once. It's saying no consistently, because that's what breaks the expectation. That's what resets the system. And once that happens, everything changes. Not overnight, but permanently. You stop being the default solution. You stop being the backup plan. You stop being the person people run to when things go wrong. And you become something else. Someone who chooses where their energy goes. Someone who decides what they carry. Someone who understands that being capable doesn't mean being available for everything. That's the difference. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I didn't wake up the next day feeling free. That's not how it works. There was no dramatic moment, no sense of victory, no instant transformation. Just a normal morning. Alarm, coffee, work. The difference wasn't what I was doing. It was what I wasn't carrying anymore. No tension waiting for the next call. No mental checklist of other people's problems. No background noise telling me I owed someone something. That absence. That's what freedom actually feels like. And it's subtle at first. You don't notice it immediately because you're so used to operating under pressure that when it's gone, your system doesn't trust it. You keep expecting something to drop. Another demand, another crisis, another situation you're supposed to fix. But it doesn't come. And after a while, you start to realize it's not coming back. That's when it shifts, not outside, inside. I started making decisions differently, not bigger decisions, cleaner ones. What I wanted, what made sense, what actually moved my life forward, not what kept everything else from falling apart. That's a different mindset, and it changes everything, because for most of my life, my decisions were filtered through one question. How will this affect them, not me? Them, family, expectations, reactions. And when you live like that long enough, you stop knowing what you actually want. You just know what keeps things stable. That's not freedom, that's maintenance. Walking away forced me to reset that. At first it felt unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because when you stop prioritizing other people's needs, there's a gap. And you have to fill it with something real, not obligation, choice. So I started small, time, where I spent it, who I spent it with, what I said yes to, what I didn't. No announcements, no explanations, just quiet adjustments. And over time, those adjustments built something solid. A life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. That's the part people misunderstand. they think freedom comes from money. It doesn't. Money gives you options, but it doesn't remove pressure. It doesn't change your mindset. It doesn't automatically give you control. I had money before everything happened. Savings, stability, structure. That didn't stop my family from trying to control me. That didn't stop me from almost saying yes. What changed my life wasn't the 12 million, it was the moment I decided they weren't getting any of it. That decision mattered more than the number because it forced me to draw a line, not financially, personally. It said I decide what happens next, not them, not expectations, not guilt, me. And once you make that decision, you don't go back because you see everything differently. You start recognizing patterns you used to ignore. People who only show up when they need something. Conversations that revolve around pressure instead of respect. Situations where you're expected to give more than you receive. You notice it faster, and you respond differently. You don't engage the same way. You don't explain yourself as much. You don't try to convince people to understand you. You just move, quietly, forward. That's real power. Not control over other people. Control over yourself. Over your time, your energy, your decisions. That's what most people are actually looking for. They just think they'll find it somewhere else. In validation, in approval, in fixing things. You won't. Because as long as someone else's opinion determines your actions, you're not free. You're just operating under a different kind of control. Let me be clear about something. Walking away didn't solve everything. It didn't erase the past. It didn't make things perfect. But it gave me something I didn't have before. Ownership of my life, of my direction, of my decisions. And that's enough, more than enough. Because once you have that, you can build anything on your terms, not as a reaction, not as a response to pressure, but as a choice. That's the difference between surviving and actually living. And if you're still in a situation where you feel stuck, where every decision feels like it's tied to someone else, where you're constantly managing things that don't belong to you, you need to understand this. You don't need to win against them. You don't need revenge. You don't need them to admit they were wrong. You just need to stop playing the role they assigned to you. That's it. Because the moment you do, the entire dynamic changes, not because they accept it, because you no longer participate in it. And without your participation, it falls apart. That's what happened in my life. Not overnight, but completely. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You don't have to carry what isn't yours. You don't have to fix what you didn't break. And you don't have to stay in a system that only works when you sacrifice yourself to keep it running. You can walk away, not dramatically, not loudly, just clearly. And when you do, you might not feel powerful right away. You might not feel anything at all, but give it time, because eventually, that silence you were afraid of turns into peace. And that peace is worth more than anything you had to leave behind.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction, but the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.